You can't go wrong with small petrol cars. That would be a really strong area because they're just not produced so much anymore. As less and less of those are in the market, then you get strength. The used car market, it's not rocket science, it's supply and demand. The fact that there's going to be less of these smaller petrol cars will prove those values will be strong.
Welcome to the Automotive Business Podcast, where every week we listen to the insight and opinion of architects of the industry, the data scientists, the disruptors, and the heavy hitters to throw a spotlight on the margins, the markets, and the machines. Whether you're running a single forecourt or a global fleet, we want this to answer the questions in your business motoring world, and more importantly, where it's going. My guest today is a man who arguably has more visibility on the UK used market than anyone else in the business. For over a decade, he was the face of the Black Book at CAP HPI, but he's now moved from the world of legacy guides to the world of live, hyper-intelligent data at Picasso Vehicle Intelligence, who relaunched as Cazana. He also continues to consult across the industry for OEMs and leasing companies, amongst others. He's overseeing a system that pings nearly 1 million VRNs a day, tracking everything from the Chinese brand arrival to the exact moment an EV hits its price floor. If you want to know what a car is actually worth, not what the book says it's worth, you need to listen to this man. Derren Martin, welcome to ABP.
Thank you very much.
Now, I know that you would be equally happy talking about Arsenal Football Club, but we want to keep this light and entertaining. So we're going to stay very much on the automotive side of things. And I'm going to kick off straight into a question about your area of expertise. Now, you're crunching, I think it's around 800,000 VRNs every single day, which is obviously a huge amount of noise. Derren, what's the one thing in that data right now that you can see, but doesn't seem to be part of the wider conversation?
Yeah, with the amount of data there is, those 800,000 records and the new brands that are coming in where they haven't got much of a used car footprint at the moment, the Chinese brands that everybody's talking about that are doing fantastic volumes in the new car world. With that amount of used car data, we're starting to see used cars from those BYDs, Omoda, JQs coming through. And obviously, it's vitally important that their used cars are proved to be as popular and are priced strongly for the protection of RVs. So that's what we're seeing. I would say that's what stands out in the data, because you start to think, well, they've only been around a year. They won't have any used cars in the market, but they have. And we've actually created a dashboard for one of the Chinese brands so they can track their cars, basically. So they can track the younger used cars that are either within their franchise or outside their franchise, how long they take to sell, and the pricing of them. Because ideally, they want to keep the prices as strong as possible and keep as many within the franchise as well.
Speaking about Chinese brands is basically what everyone's talking about in the business, and you've been around the block. I was with a Chinese manufacturer the other day. This time last year, they had 4% brand recognition in the UK. They've just come back with a stat where they've now got 27% brand recognition. What's that going to look like in a year's time? How surprising is this arrival of a brand new brands? No one knows them, but everyone seems to be buying into them.
It's crazy, really. I started consulting just over a year ago, and one of my first pieces of consulting work was with Omoda and JQ. And when I started there, no one had heard of them, really. And obviously, you speak to your friends and things like that. Have you heard of Omoda? Have you heard of JQ? No. If you ask them now, pretty much all of them have, and they've seen their cars on the road. When I first started there as well, they were talking about bringing the Cherry brand in. 3 or 4 months later, the Cherry brand's in as well. I think it's called China Speed. It's crazy. And they're getting market share. They're stealing the market share off the legacy brands, off the incumbents. And yet everyone's aware of them. And the cars look great. And they are brilliant to drive. And the tech's brilliant. And they're cheap. So really, it's what's not to like.
I went for another Chinese brand. Back in last summer, I went to meet them. And they were talking about, actually, we were saying it's called operating in Chinese time, which is, when it comes to research and development, over in China, they had 2 huge 1,000 square meters of warehouse industrial facility offices where they had over 2,000 graduates working in research and development. So they put an idea into that, and literally 7 days later, they've got something working that's coming out of it. It's just blowing all the models of what working best practice looks like, isn't it?
Yeah, they can make changes very, very quickly. Things that they want doing, they just ask somebody to do it and it gets done. And I think it's not just Omoda and Jake, obviously BYD, they kind of paved the way for the others, in my opinion. They had huge sponsorship of the last Euros, which brought them to everyone's attention. So that helps the whole of the Chinese brands to come through and follow them, but also compete with them. But yeah, it's crazy. The work ethic's incredible. What most of them, I think probably all of them have done is they've employed UK automotive experts as well in different areas. So they appreciate that they don't know the market as well as they could, or as well as their home market. So they employ people that do. None of them are using the agency model. They're all using proven dealers, which really helps as well, because dealers are the strongest in their local areas. People buy off those dealers. So some of the legacy brands have kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit by maybe trimming down their network, and those dealerships are now lapping up the Chinese brands that are coming in and doing very well. So if you used to have a Qashqai or a Mocha, for example, and you might go into part exchange that to a dealership that maybe was a Nissan or a Vauxhall, and you're coming out with a brand new Omoda or a brand new BYD. So it's a huge sea change that probably none of us saw coming. When I worked at Vauxhall years ago, we were always number two. We always thought we'd be number two. We used to do what Ford did and follow them, and I thought Ford and Vauxhall would always be number one and two, but we've seen massive change.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask next, if you're a legacy established, say, European brand, what are you thinking right now?
Well, they have to act very quickly. They have to compete. It is difficult for them. I think there will potentially be impacts on RVs if the new brands are bringing in cheaper new cars. It makes sense that their used cars will be cheaper as well, and then they're competing with the legacy brands of used cars. It's not just the European guys. I think the ones that are under huge threat are probably some of the Japanese brands, the Hondas, the Suzukis, Toyota to a lesser extent. So yeah, there's a big change there, but they have to adapt, and they're very well set up for it. But yeah, profit-wise, it will affect them. Market share, it will definitely affect them. And a lot of them are already flipping towards, maybe more profitable sales channels, and they may have to decide to sell less cars, but that obviously has an impact on factories and all of those sorts of things. So yeah, it's a big change for the market, but we have to embrace it.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Bird, Editorial Director at Asta Media. If you work anywhere in the motor trade right now, you'll know just how quickly things are changing, from electrification and regulation to margin, supply and customer expectations. That's why on the 14th of April at 11 a.m, we're hosting an Asta Automotive webinar in partnership with Cox Automotive. Cox's Insight Director Philip Nothard is one of the most respected voices in the sector. He'll be sharing the latest data-driven insights along with what they mean in practical terms for all of you out there on the ground. I'm excited to be hosting the session myself and learning from it, getting into what really matters for your business. It's not just up to me though. Those in attendance on the day will have the chance to submit their own questions for Phil, putting his significant expertise through its paces. There's only going to be so much time though. So if you've got something burning that you want to put out there, sign up now to be at the front of the queue. It's free to attend, it's online, and you can join from wherever you are. Take a moment out of your busy day to get the latest scoop with Asta Media. Just head to webinar.motortradenews.com to register your place. I'll see you there.
You spent, as we've already mentioned, years as the face of the Black Book, and a very nice face it is too. Now you're at Picasso pushing live non-editorial data. So is the era of the monthly price guide officially dead, or are we just too sentimental to let it go?
I suppose what's the face of Black Book? The Black Book is more of a brand than an actual Black Book. The Black Book went about probably 10 years ago now. When I was there, the decision was made to scrap the book. I've got a signed one in my drawer from all of the editors at the time, which was probably worth about 25p or something like that on eBay. So I'll keep hold of that. So I joined CAP in 2013. They'd already introduced live values. They introduced live values in 2012. So they have monthly, they have live. I was a big endorser of CAP Live. It was the way that most dealers were looking at it. Obviously, in the auction catalogues, it's still monthly. So there's both sides to look at it. The dealers probably want live values. Finance houses, leasing companies who are setting RVs off them, they want a more static monthly value. And at Cazana, we're doing both now. So when I joined, we were just doing live values, but we quickly realised that we needed monthly as well. So there's both. And all monthly is a snapshot of live on a particular day. So on the first of the month, you can cut off. And then for those who want a static value that they can rely on for the month, they'll have that. But obviously values do move up and down during a month. But you also have to be careful with that. And the way we look at things is try not to listen too much to the noise. If values are a sawtooth thing, as we call it, going up, down through a month, that's not really what's happening in the market. We're trying to reflect a value for the whole market which is quite difficult to do, really. You've got to produce a value set for a particular vehicle, a particular age and mileage point, one value for the whole country that doesn't really exist. So you have to come up with an average value for that. And obviously there's regional variations, and something we're working on a lot of Cazana is producing regional values as well. So you can not only look at a UK value of a Ford Fiesta, you can see what it's worth within a 10-mile radius of you. So that gives you a little bit more intel.
That's interesting. Those regional variations are fascinating. Are you seeing any big significant differences in the types of cars and the values, say, from the northwest to the southeast, or in Belfast compared to Devon? What's the most stark contrast?
You can see changes in there. You get hotspots as well. Obviously, around cities, diesel cars don't perform very well. So that's where EVs tend to have hotspots, around those sort of clean air zones, around where you can get the cars charged. There's always been strong EV values in the northeast, around Sunderland, because of Nissan, where the Leaf is produced. So you get things like that. Northern Ireland can ebb and flow, and at the moment, values are quite strong over in Northern Ireland. Diesel values can be strong in more rural areas. But also, what you can see is if there's oversupply of particular vehicles. So if somebody did a big deal with a dealership in Scotland, then you'd see that tends to more be on vehicle type rather than an Audi A4 does well there and not so well there. It's more on fuel type, body style, that type of thing. But you definitely get variations, but it changes throughout time as well. The hotspots tend to be EVs around city areas, diesel in more rural areas, those sorts of things.
Now, I have a conversation with you without talking about EVs. The price of EVs, the interest and the demand for EVs has been something that people have been talking about non-stop for the last few years. Have those prices finally found their footing? And what does the used EV market now look like?
I've lived and breathed EVs, obviously, from my time at CAP. When I joined CAP, a year after I joined, we recruited an editor, and he always used to say to me, "You made me the EV editor," because I was the new boy and there was hardly anything to do. So he was valuing Nissan Leafs at the time. You look where that is now, it's crazy. And we had to split the workload up there. But so to answer that question, the last few years, last year's been okay. The years before that were very, very difficult for the EV world. And you look back and you think, well, why didn't we see that coming? Because there's a lot of volume coming through. Charging network's not there. There's a lot of people who still don't want to buy an EV. And there's some really good deals on new cars. So why would you buy a used one? So you could see that happening. And also the big thing for me was that the used EV was a lot more expensive than an ICE car. So again, why would you buy one? So they had to come down to be closer to parity. Some of those EVs now look cracking value. Some of them have probably still got some way to go. But generally, if they're around parity and they've got a decent range now, the ranges are improving, then yeah, I think they have bottomed out. And I don't expect anything like what we've seen over the last few years. What's happened has made everybody aware that they need to be masters of their own destiny. The guides are a good thing, but they are guides. And if you're setting values of EVs that you're going to stock a lot of, get your own methodology in place and then use the guides as a reference point for those. But if you're carrying a lot of a particular vehicle, then you have to take your own risk on those and not just use an RV from a guide that actually hasn't got any of those cars in stock. But when I'm setting values, I haven't got hundreds of those on my forecourt. I haven't got hundreds of those on my fleet. You have to do your homework on those yourself. But some of them now look really good value. And I would say the dealers need to be stocking them and selling them now, because a lot of them are, but a lot of them still aren't.
Yeah, you alluded to one of the issues a few minutes ago, was that the fact is it's really cheap to get a new EV, isn't it? So why would you go used? And does that mean that in the way that we have government support for buying new EVs, do you need a similar support for the used market?
You need support for the used market without a doubt, but I don't think it's financial, as in, let's throw $3,000 at it, because all that will do is that the used cars will set their own value. If you throw $3,000 at it, that just means that the cars become $3,000 cheaper, or they stay the same price and somebody pockets that $3,000, maybe the dealer or whatever. It doesn't need to have money thrown at it. I saw an article the other day about interest-free loans or something like that. Let's make it 0% or something like that on used EVs, make them more attractive to buy. But also with EVs, a lot of people that buy a used car, it's a necessity purchase. Maybe they haven't got a driveway. Maybe they're living in a terraced house or in a flat. So that network needs to improve. And one of the things that the government could definitely do is stop the charging out away from home being so expensive. That gets the full VAT on it. Whereas you get reduced VAT if you're charging at home. You pay more for petrol if you drive up and down the motorway. That's just a fact of life. But as soon as you leave your front door, if you're paying more to charge your vehicle up, then there's no parity there. That needs to change as well. So that is one thing, but I don't think it's a grant to just throw money at it. There's different ways of using the money. As I say, interest-free, improving the network. We've got to now encourage the rest of the population away from the early adopters to want a used EV.
And I was reading a report last week, and 3% of respondents said they had faith in used EV batteries. How do you address that? Because it's what everyone's talking about when it comes to a used EV.
Yeah, I've always found it amusing, really, because no one thinks how long's my engine going to last when you buy a car. And the batteries, they've all got 8-year warranties. Their data that's come out recently shows they last forever. They'll probably outlive the car. I really don't think there's anything to worry about that. There's plenty of companies around now that are providing battery health. And one of the things that the OEMs need to do on their used car programs is to produce a battery health certificate, prove that the batteries are fine. I think this issue will go away. I think for people buying an EV for the first time, it's an issue. But once they've tried one and used one and then maybe sold the vehicle at the end of it, those batteries last. There's no problem with them. It is one thing that people cite. I've always thought as well that if you go out to a load of consumers, of which we all are consumers, and say, are you worried about battery health on an electric vehicle? They'll say yes. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are or they've even considered it. You're putting words into people's mouths, putting thoughts into people's heads. So I'm not saying it's a non-issue, but it's something that isn't as scary as everybody thinks. Those batteries will last.
Now, you talk a lot about retail back valuations. For people listening who still buy based on trade up, why is that old school way of thinking actually costing them their margin in today's market?
Obviously, I spent 12 years defending trade up, and now I've moved to consulting, and I think there's room for both, to be honest. I'm never one to slate a sort of a competitor or anything like that. I think there's room for both, but if you're going to go out and buy a vehicle, it's very nice to have a guide trade price on it. But what you've got to look at is how much am I going to be able to sell that car for? So look at the retail data. I can sell that car for 16. I know these are all my costs. I'll buy it for 14 because that's the margin that I need. You've got to look at the advertised prices of cars to make that decision. So there's definitely room for both. And obviously in the different segments of the markets, different sectors, a leasing company will be looking at trade. Dealers, when they're buying, need to be looking at retail. So I think it's key to know where both of them are, but probably retail has become more and more important. And even the legacy guides, they produce a retail value as well, and they will be looking at that sort of area as well, looking at the data. I think the thing with Cazana is we've got more data than everybody else. One of the things I've done recently is just plowed back through the methodology for how the values are produced, because obviously Cazana isn't new. It's been going since 2012, 2013. The methodology still works really well. It harvests the data, it looks at the age and mileage points, it clusters all of the data together, and it comes up with those retail values. The way to look at it from a retail point of view, but there are obviously different companies who want the trade values as well. So it's horses for courses, look at everything. There are obvious things within the data as well that can change what a car's worth. If a guide says it's worth a certain amount, you look at that car and has it got the MOT history on there? Has it got more options than the guides say? All of those types of things that are really important to value in a car.
Just as an aside, you're getting all these like million data points in huge volume all the time. How did it work back in the day? Was it literally people writing things down on a spreadsheet?
When CAP was first set up in 1979, I think it was, there was a man wandering around at the auctions writing down values, producing a book with a small number of vehicles in it. That was how it was set up. Glasses used to do the same. Glasses were obviously quite strong back in the day. CAP then came and overtook them. And then since then, there's lots of companies out there doing it. But yeah, back in the day, it was wandering around the auctions, and people do still criticize some of the guides for not attending the auctions. It's still something that you can do. Go and talk to people and press the flesh and find out what's happening in the world. There's still a place for it. But generally, we're in a very data-driven market now. You can't do anything without data now.
So with all that tech you've got, you can see things a dealer can't. What's the one invisible factor that can knock off a load of money from a car's value that most dealers are still failing to spot during the Part X appraisal?
I don't think much is invisible anymore. Everything is really out there. One of the things with the Cazana platform is it shows the vehicle timeline. So you can see it had its MOT. If it failed its MOT, it lists what it failed its MOT on. And we gave this platform to somebody to give it a try. He's in the PR world, but he's also got a dealership. And he came back and said that was the most interesting thing for him to see the vehicle timeline. It's got pictures of when it was last sold, so you can see the history of that vehicle. You can see what it's failed on, what it's passed on. Service history is obviously really important as well. I've recently done some work on service history on a vehicle. And when we looked at it, cars with a service history were selling for 5% more than cars without service history. Obviously, there's lots of differences, but by ages and things like that. But generally, you get a few £100 for that. Nothing is particularly invisible, but you need to check the spec of the vehicle. A lot of the Chinese brands that have come in now, you can't get many options on those, so that's a lot easier. But vehicles before, you get £1,000 for a glass sunroof, which wouldn't be in any guide necessarily. But our data, because it looks at the option content, it will give a price by VRO and it will price it based on what the content of that vehicle is as well. The more hidden things are full service history. Is it a franchise dealer service history? Depending on the age of the vehicle and what it's passed its MOT on previously, and the option content. They're not invisible, but they're the things that you probably need to look at when you're buying and selling.
Just coming back to those Chinese brands a second, Derren, because they're all pretty much unknown to most of us 12 months ago, but how do you go about predicting a future price for them? And also, are the UK buying public all putting them into sort of one category? Because we know where a BMW sits beside a Ford, sits beside a Peugeot. People understand the hierarchy there. Are the British car buying public and the way it affects the prices, are they putting a Moda, JQ, Changan, BYD all on the same level?
They will definitely compare them. It's just natural to do that. Your first point on there, how do you produce a future value of one? You have to look at the vehicle, first of all. You have to look at all the dimensions of the drivability of it. There's no history, obviously. So how do you then put a value against it? You have to look at the competitor set, really. So once you've driven it, got the size, dimensions, spec and everything, you would then look at a competitor set to see what it most fits alongside. You also have to look at the volumes. You have to look at the sales channels. Are there any what could be called distressful channels? Are they doing too many in one particular channel that might affect the values going forward? Has that Chinese brand got a remarketing strategy in place? How are they going to help their customers dispose of used vehicles in the future? All of these things will all go into a melting pot. And it's not a simple process, but generally those are the things that you have to take into account. The competitor set is one of the things, and then go into the more minute detail of it. But obviously driving the vehicles as well, because that's what the consumer will base it on. The looks of the vehicle, the aesthetics of the vehicle, all of these things, they all go into the melting pot, and then you come up with the value, and you generally come up with a value that the manufacturer isn't particularly happy with, but that's the nature of the beast. As long as it's transparent and explainable, and time will tell as well. When the first used cars come back into the market and sell for a price, that's when the proof of the pudding's in the eating, basically. That's when the residual values could potentially go up or down based on how well those cars are faring in the used car market. And I guess it's not just EVs, it's all types of vehicles now from these new brands coming. If they're selling new cars very cheaply with cheaper finance, then people walk into a showroom for a used car, they might walk away with a new one. You have to look after all of it. You've got to look after the used car network as well. There's 8 million used cars that get sold and only 2 million new cars, and the residual values depend on those used cars. So that's really important.
Whether you're managing a local forecourt or nationwide corporate fleet, the challenges of 2026 require a specialized perspective. Business Motoring is the dedicated home for SME fleet managers and professional motoring advice. For the deep dives into operational strategy, stay right here on the Automotive Business Podcast. You mentioned there about sometimes the manufacturers aren't particularly happy. What does that look like? Do you get an email through saying, Derren, what the hell was that valuation you gave? How do they communicate that?
Yeah, I don't get it so much anymore, but we used to get that, and Cap in particular will get that on all sides. There's a lot of transparency. You'd explain how the decision's been made. Still might not agree with it, but as long as the decision can be explained and it's not too much on gut feel or, yeah, we didn't like that bit of it or something like that, then it has to be based on fact. As an OEM, you can explain stuff that maybe will put the residual value up a little bit. If you say, I'm not sure you've taken that bit into account, or you've not taken that bit into account, or we're not going to do any daily rental, we're going to do less volumes in these particular areas. One of the things that I used to find was that OEMs will tell you things and then you can't really believe it, because they might say they're never going to sell another car into daily rental, and then a year later when their volumes are down, they're selling another car into daily rental, which can affect values. It's always been an interesting area, but as long as you can explain yourself and there's no smoke and mirrors involved, you've just got to be able to justify yourself. And that's what everybody has to be able to do now.
Now, you said the market will be resilient this year. Can you give me some predictions? I'm not going to ask you to bet your own house on it. What's going to have the strongest price retention? What's going to be the softest? Can you just give me a few approximate predictions, should we say, for the year ahead?
I think you can't go wrong with small petrol cars. That would be a really strong area because they're just not produced so much anymore. So the days of Fiesta and Corsa being thousands and thousands of them in the market, you can still get a Corsa, you can't get a Fiesta, the Audi A1 as well. So dealers that deal with those, consumers still want them. It's still a first car or something that once you've learned to drive, you want to drive for a few years. As less and less of those are in the market, then you get strength. The used car market, it's not rocket science, it's supply and demand. And if you get too many of particular types of vehicles or particular brand, too many Golfs or something like that, that can affect the values. Or even if you get too many coming back into the used car market in one go. So the fact that there's going to be less of these smaller petrol cars will prove that those values will be strong. They'll stay strong. I think probably on the flip side, cars that could be weaker, well, EVs that are too expensive now compared to ICE vehicles. If the new brands that are coming in don't look after their remarketing, so if they blitz a load of new cars into the market and continue doing that and don't look after the used cars, then the monthly payments will be affected eventually because the monthly payments are dependent on residual values, which are dependent on used car pricing. So I think some of those new brands need to be really careful, and probably all of them need to be careful together because, as you said earlier, do the consumers class them all in one? If a BYD goes down in value, then potentially an Omoda and Jayco has to be a comparable price to that. So they've all got to get their acts together there. They've all got to get a remarketing strategy and work with experts in the industry, work with the auctions, work with remarketing companies to get those values as strong as possible. Yeah, I would say that's an area to be wary of. And the more and more EVs that come in from whatever brand they are, we need to encourage take up of it. Over the last few years, it's all been about company cars for EVs. Now they're reasonably priced for consumers, but again, we've got to get them into used cars as well. And it's those people that it doesn't fit naturally with. We need to get those into EVs. Generally, most people that try an EV, they like it, but it's more than just liking it. It's about their local area and being able to charge it. So a word of caution still on EVs, I would say.
Purely based on what it looks like for people and their everyday lives, what their infrastructure is around them rather than the actual cars themselves.
Yeah, both. If you can't charge it, then there's no point having one, is there? So all of the tech that you need around on-street charging, that's what's required, doing it by street lamps and under pavements and those sorts of things. That's what's needed to encourage the guy that used to go and buy a $5,000 Fiesta in 10 years' time, 15 years' time. They're not going to be able to buy things like that. They're all going to be EVs if we go down the path we're going down, which there's no guarantee that we are. But those are the sorts of things that need to be in place for everybody eventually to be able to buy an EV, if that's the path we go down.
You're talking about that path and you're not sure we're going to go down it. Why wouldn't we? And what are the alternatives?
It's always been very, very difficult to hit that ZEV mandate target by 2030, where the percentage of vehicles that have got to be EVs. And when it was announced 2030 seemed like a lifetime away. Well, it's 4 years away now. Once you go from 2027 to 2028, I think that target becomes 52% of all new cars being EVs. The manufacturers are invested in it, but you'll see with a lot of these Chinese brands that come in as well, they're not just going for EV, they're selling hybrids, they're selling pure petrol cars. I don't think anyone is sure that this is going to happen. And I think most people are pretty sure that it's not achievable to get to those percentages. And you can see what's happened in America already. But obviously, we've got someone different in charge over there. They were never completely invested in EVs, and now they've come away from it even more. Lots of things can change. And I think the nearer we get to those targets, the more it is likely to change. And there's a review going on, or will be going on shortly, of what happens with the mandate. And I think it might just be less restrictive, but whether we can actually get to 100% or not. And a lot of these ICE cars, hybrids, they're clean cars. It's not like the old days where there was a rattly old diesel driving around with smoke billowing out the back. I think things will have to change because the OEMs are set up for it, but it's going to be hugely restrictive to get to anywhere near 100%.
Okay, Derren, we've asked, hopefully, the big questions. We haven't talked about the big question with Arsenal because we haven't got enough time to do that. And that will take a long time. So we've got a lightning round now. And I'll just kick off with the first question. What is the most undervalued vehicle segment in the UK right now?
This might go against what I just said, but EVs are probably one of them. Go onto Auto Trader and or other platforms, put in electric vehicle, 10 to 15 grand, and see what you can get. And there's a lot. There's some really good cars in there that you can get. Within 5 years old, you can get an Audi e-tron You can get a VW ID3, BMW i3, a couple of BYDs. So yeah, there's some good EVs in there and cheaper prices.
So what is one piece of advice for a business motoring professional afraid of that 2028 ZEV mandate?
I would say don't be. Adapt. Things may well change, but you have to follow the path. But diversify. I think diversifying is really important for dealers. It's brave to just go all EV, gives you a bit of a niche in the market, but I would diversify with all types of vehicles still. I'd still stock diesel cars, I'd still stock petrol cars, I'd definitely stock hybrid cars, and I would be stocking EVs, but don't go all in with one thing and just be careful.
Okay, and last of the quick questions, if you could put 5 words on a billboard outside every dealership in the country, what would they be? And Derren, no swearing.
Billboards for the consumer, I would say come and drive an EV. Because once you've driven one, they're brilliant to drive. I've driven a lot of them. Just come and drive one. So yeah, 5, is that 5? Come and drive an EV.
Fantastic. It's been great talking to you, Derren. Thank you for all your wonderful insight and knowledge. And if you want to master the strategy behind the industry, make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter at Motor Trade News and check out our latest deep dive in Automotive Business Magazine. Join us next week as we are joined by Philip Nothard, the man who has been a pillar of the trade for over 35 years and is currently the Insight and Strategy Director at Cox Automotive, the co-host of Motor Trade Radio, and the man OEMs call when they need to know if their 2026 plans are actually grounded in reality. Until then, you've been listening to the Automotive Business Podcast. I've been your host, Adrian Simpson, and until next time, goodbye. Oh my God, that sounded semi-professional.